When I found out I was going to be a parent, I immediately felt a lot of anxiety and worry. So I went on to BetterHelp to try to look for a therapist to help me with that.
My relationship with my family and with my boyfriend and with myself were suffering. I really needed help.
I was ruminating a lot. Really getting those thoughts out to a therapist and getting feedback was just life-changing.
Discover what BetterHelp Online Therapy can do for you. Visit BetterHelp.com today.
To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In September 2002, 2 women were found dead inside the Dolly Madison bakery in Great Bend, Kansas. They were 24-year-old Mandi Alexander and 79-year-old Mary Drake. Even after years of investigating and the discovery of foreign DNA on one of the victims, the case of the Dolly Madison murders is still unsolved today. How might new advancements in forensic science solve these awful murders? This is Forensic Tales, episode number 270, The Dolly Madison Bakery Murders. September 4th, 2002, Great Bend, Kansas, a place known for its unique location along the Arkansas River. It's probably not the first place you think of when talking about unsolved double homicides. For that, you might only think of places like Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, one of those big cities. But Great Bend, Kansas, you might not have even heard of it before. Founded in 1871 by the Great Bend Town Company, Great Bend is the boyhood home of a Nobel Prize winner and is considered the birthplace of drag racing. But after what happened in 2002, Great Bend, Kansas is also home to one of the area's most brutal and unsolved murders. Is there forensic evidence? According to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, the answer is yes. They likely have the killer's DNA profile. So, with DNA, why hasn't this case been solved in over 20 years? Well, let's see if we can find out. On the afternoon of September 4th, 2002, a possible customer arrived at the Dolly Madison Bakery parking lot at 1004 Harrison Street in Great Bend. It was a local discount bread company where you could pick up anything from affordable snacks to loaves of bread to cupcakes. Next to the Dolly Madison Bakery was a smoke shop, and across the street was a bank, a McDonald's fast food restaurant, and an Applebee's. On any given day, a lot of traffic crosses in front of the bakery. There was 10th Street and Harrison Street that saw a lot of local traffic, people going to and from work each day, and there was also railroad tracks that crossed right in front, carrying people who might be simply traveling through Great Bend on their way to another part of the state. For many people, the Dolly Madison Bakery was a community staple. You could get in, grab whatever bakery item you needed at a reasonable price, and then get out. And for others, it was a business they relied on. But on this particular afternoon, September 2002, something was off around the Dolly Madison. Despite the amount of foot and car traffic outside, no one seemed to really know what was about to happen on the inside. A customer arrived in the bakery's parking lot and saw a man locking the front door. This caught his attention because it was only the late afternoon. The bakery usually didn't close until another couple of hours. But here's another thing. I wasn't able to find out exactly who this customer was or witness. Some reports say that it might have been a child, while others say it was an adult. Either way, the police eventually identified this person as a very important witness because of what I'm about to describe next. So this customer walked toward the front door of the bakery, but before he could reach for the door, the man locking up said that the bakery was closed for the rest of the day. So the customer turned around and walked away while the man locking up did the same thing. He closed the bakery's doors with a set of keys and started walking down the sidewalk. After that, the customer, whether they were just a boy or an adult, didn't think about the strange man until much later. A few hours after that, a delivery person arrived at the bakery around 8 p.m. and entered through the back door. But instead of making his delivery, he encountered something else: the dead bodies of 2 women. The first was 24-year-old Mandi Alexander, a mother of 2 young children. She had just gotten a job at the bakery as a clerk 3 days earlier. Those who knew Mandi described her as bubbly and happy-go-lucky. Even though she might have taken a while to warm up to you, once she did, though, she'd be your friend for a lifetime. She was also said to be a very good mother to her 2 young children who are now left without a mom. Based on statements made by her family and friends, it seems like Mandi was having a tough time before she was murdered, and most of her problems stemmed from being in bad relationships. She was said to be the submissive one, and her boyfriends would be the controllers. But once she got out of these toxic relationships, the boyfriends, she was back to being her happy and normal self again. In fact, just a few weeks before she was killed, she and her kids had moved into a brand new apartment on the west side of town. And like I mentioned a few moments ago, she had just gotten that job at the Dolly Madison a few days before she was killed. So even though she was going through a rough patch with abusive and bad boyfriends, she was well on her way to moving on with her life. She wanted what was best, not only for herself, but also for her 2 kids. Going back to the business where this happened, the Dolly Madison Discount Bakery on Harrison Street. It wasn't common for brand new employees to work the closing shift. Normally, a more experienced employee took that shift. I think that could be said about a lot of businesses. There were just a lot more tasks that needed to be done at closing time. Counting down the registers, collecting the money for the day, making sure that the store is clean, presentable, ready for the next business day. So it wasn't typical for someone as new as Mandi to be there alone. She was only on her 3rd day. But this particular day was different. The woman who usually worked that particular shift had called out sick earlier that day. She had a family emergency. So Mandi, being the kind person that she was, she agreed to stay and cover the shift. So earlier that afternoon, the bakery manager collected some money to take to the bank next door and told Mandi that if she needed anything or she had any questions, she could call her anytime. Mandi wasn't even supposed to be there. The next victim was 79-year-old Mary Drake, a regular customer who had gone to the bakery that day to pick up a loaf of bread, but never made it home. Born on February 13th, 1923, to parents Arthur and Mary Ellen, Mary Drake was a lifetime resident of Great Bend. Throughout most of her adult life, she worked for the Fuller Brush Company as an assembly production worker. She was also a very active member at her church. Mary had 2 sons and then eventually 6 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. I wasn't able to find out much more about Mary's life other than the fact that she was very much loved and adored by her family, friends, and fellow churchgoers. To sum up just the kind of lady that she was a loving grandmother who invited her grandchildren over to watch Saturday Night Live with her. Both victims, Mary Drake and Mandi Alexander, were both found dead inside of the bakery. Mary was simply shopping for bread, and Mandi was the new employee. And while the police in Great Bend have been extremely tight-lipped about their investigation, here's everything we know about the murders. The first is that neither victim had been sexually assaulted, so that wasn't the motive. The other detail was exactly how they were killed. The police haven't confirmed all the details, but we know Mandi and Mary were stabbed to death. However, the exact murder weapon remains unknown. All the police have said is that some type of sharp object was used in the killings, leaving many people to assume that it was a knife. But without the police's confirmation, it's impossible to say whether that's true or not. Also, whatever weapon was used to kill Mandi and Mary has never been found. The killer must have taken it with them. Next, we know that this was a very bloody crime scene. Both women were said to be found face down in pools of blood inside of a small office area in the back of the store. The Great Bend Tribune also reported that their throats had been cut, so you can only imagine the amount of blood. And even though their bodies were found in the back office, blood was said to have been found in many other places throughout the bakery. As soon as the local news started running stories about the murders, the police received a tip. It was the customer who showed up at the bakery earlier that day and saw the strange man locking up early. And here's everything he had to say. He said that as he approached the bakery, the man said the business was closed for the day. After that, he just locked up with a set of keys and walked down the sidewalk. The man didn't seem anxious. He seemed totally normal. He was just someone locking up the bakery. According to this customer, the man was white, around 6'1" to 6'2", 175 pounds. He had collar-length, light brown to blonde hair with a slight beard, and he was wearing a black t-shirt, blue jean shorts, and a baseball cap. But also interesting, this man wasn't covered in blood or anything. If he had just stabbed these women to death, he managed not to get any blood on him. Or if he did, he cleaned up or changed his clothes. The police eventually got surveillance video from the bank across the street showing this person locking up. But after he left the Dolly Madison, the camera lost sight of him. It showed him walking down the sidewalk for a few yards, but after that, he completely disappeared from the camera's view. So no one knows what happened to him after that. Did he get into a car? Was someone around the corner waiting for him? And the biggest question, what did this individual know about the murders? I can't answer any of these questions because as of today, the police haven't been able to identify this person. After he locked up the bakery, walked down the sidewalk, he was gone. The police don't know who he is, where he went, or what his connection to the murders actually is. We might have his DNA, something that we're going to talk about later in the episode, but that's it. The Great Bend Police Department and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, or KBI, jointly led the investigation. And although not much is known about what exactly was found inside of the bakery, here's what's been made public. Very little money was actually taken from the cash registers. So I mentioned just a few minutes ago that rape didn't seem to be the motive. Well, neither did a robbery. Only a small amount of cash had been taken from the registers, but both Mandi and Mary's purses and wallets were left behind. So if money was something that this person was after, they left a lot of it behind. They didn't even bother to take the two victims' wallets or purses. To give you a better picture of this, Mary's purse was found still sitting on the store counter next to a loaf of bread, suggesting that she was paying for her items right when this person walked in and forced her to get to the back. Also, why target a bakery if you need money? Both the Great Bend Police and KBI thought this particular location was a little bit strange for a robbery. There was a bank across the street, a McDonald's, an Applebee's restaurant. There was even a smoke shop just across the parking lot. So why was the Dolly Madison chosen as a spot to commit a robbery and kill two innocent women? We'll talk about some of the theories as to why a little bit later on in the episode. Based on the timeline provided by the customer and the arrival of the delivery person, the KBI suspects that the murders happened sometime between 5:15 and 8 p.m. From an investigative standpoint, this timeline means a couple of things. One, the person seen locking the bakery is probably the last person to see the victims alive. The bakery owners have already confirmed this person didn't work there. So this person must have gotten the keys from Mandi and after committing the murders, used these keys to lock up and walk away. Or if they didn't get the keys from Mandi herself, they got them some other way, used to work there, or they knew someone who did. So if this person was the last person to see Mandi and Mary alive like we think that he was, then they are essentially the KBI's most important witness. And until they can be found and cleared, they're also suspect number one. The second thing about the timeline, between 5:15 and 8 o'clock is one of the most busiest times of day to commit such a brutal double murder. It's what many people would consider rush hour. And the location of the Dolly Madison is significant. It's in a pretty busy part of town. You've got 10th Street and Harrison that sees a lot of local traffic. And if murders happened between 5 and 8, that means people were out and about driving home from work on these very streets. Railroad tracks also cross right over the intersection directly in front of the bakery. So there was even more traffic there. But for some reason, whoever did this wasn't concerned about rush hour or being seen by people driving or walking by. They committed a double homicide at the same time that anyone could have walked in, but they weren't scared. Within a couple of days, the authorities received another tip. This time, it was a hotel worker who called, saying that a man had checked into the hotel the day before the murders. And for reference, this hotel is directly across the street from the Dolly Madison. Besides this particular hotel, there's a couple others within eyesight of the bakery. The employee said that a strange man rented a room for one night the day before the murders. But before he checked out the following day, he shaved his head. When he checked in, he had collar-length hair. But when he checked out, he shaved almost everything off, leaving most of the hair behind in the hotel room. So the KBI wondered, could this man also be the guy seen locking up the bakery? He almost perfectly matches the description. Around 6 feet tall, white male with collar-length light brown hair to blonde hair. He was seen checking into the hotel across the street the day before the murders. He shaved his hair and then left town the next day. So could he have shaved his head to maybe try to disguise his identity? If that was the same person, he must have known that the customer who approached him while locking up might be able to identify him. But if he changed his appearance right afterward, then maybe not. As soon as this tip came in, the Great Bend police and KBI did everything they could to track this guy down, but they were unsuccessful. Now, it's unclear why they weren't able to figure out who this person was checking in and out of the hotel, but none of that information has been made public. If the KBI knows who they are, they haven't released that information. So it's impossible for me to say whether or not they had anything to do with this case or not. As of today, he's still just considered the transient man who shaved his long hair and stayed in a hotel right after the murders. Within days, the KBI publicly released a sketch of the guy seen locking up the bakery. And it just so happens this sketch closely resembles both the customer and hotel worker's description. A white male, 30 to 35 years old, standing about 6'1" and weighing about 125 pounds, with light brown to blonde collar-length hair. A photo of this sketch can be found online if you're interested in checking it out for yourself. The Dolly Madison bakery murders affected everyone. The community, the family and friends of the victims, complete strangers. And it was even weirder that a case like this wasn't solved right away. To have a brutal double homicide happen in a place like Great Bend, Kansas is rare. But to have it happen and then be unsolved for decades, that's almost unheard of. As the weeks passed and the police continued to be very secretive about where exactly the investigation stood, what evidence they had, were there any good suspects, rumors began swirling. One of those rumors was about a possible connection between the Dolly Madison murders and another unsolved case out of Florence, Montana, the Florence Salon murders. For those of you who follow and listen to my other podcast, Find My Killer, you know that I did an entire 5-part series on the Florence Salon murders. So if you want to know more about that particular case, go subscribe and listen to the first 5 episodes of Find My Killer. You can listen on Spotify or wherever you're listening right now. So here's why those murders have been talked about when talking about the Dolly Madison case. Just before 11 a.m. on Tuesday, November 6, 2001, a customer pulled into the parking lot of a hair and nail salon called the Hair Gallery. This was in the small town of Florence, Montana, over 1,000 miles away from Great Bend. As this customer pulled into the parking lot, she saw a strangely dressed man walking out of the salon wearing a black duster coat and either a large top hat or a fedora. The reason this customer stood out was because, 1, the way that he was dressed, like he just time traveled out of the 1920s. And number 2, he walked out of the front door. Anyone who was a regular customer at the hair gallery knew to exit and enter through the back door, not the front. So the customer made a mental note about what she saw and continued to enter through the salon in the back door. But as soon as she got inside, there was a body lying on the floor in a pool of blood. It was the salon's owner, 62-year-old Dorothy Harris. Further back in the salon were 2 more bodies. 44-year-old Brenda Patch, who worked at the hair gallery as a manicurist, and 71-year-old Cynthia Paulus, a regular customer with a standing Friday morning nail appointment. Except this wasn't on a Friday, it was a Tuesday morning. Cynthia had changed her appointment that week to look nice for a basketball game that she planned to attend later that night. So she wasn't even supposed to be there that day. Now, that already sounds pretty familiar, right? Mandi wasn't supposed to be at the bakery that night either. She was covering the shift for someone else. All 3 women, Dorothy, Cynthia, Brenda, had their throats slit with what the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office, the lead law enforcement agency, said was a sharp object. That also sounds familiar, right? That was the same thing the Great Bend police and KBI said in the Dolly Madison murders. Neither set of investigators would publicly say that a knife was used. The murder weapon was simply referred to as a sharp object. Then, there were other similarities between the 2 cases. There was no signs of sexual assault in the Florence Salon murders, just like Dolly Madison. Virtually nothing was stolen from the hair gallery, except a few worthless styling caps, similar to Great Bend, Kansas, although some cash was taken from the registers in that case, but not much, and even the victims' wallets were left behind. And of course, the victims themselves and how they were killed. All female victims, some customers, some employees, all stabbed to death by a man possibly seen leaving the business right afterward, and no apparent motive in either case. So the Florence Salon murders happened in November 2001, and the Dolly Madison murders happened almost exactly 1 year later in 2002. Both cases are still unsolved today. So that's got many people wondering, are these 2 cases somehow connected because of just how similar they are? Could the same strange man seen leaving the hair gallery be the same guy who was seen locking up the Dolly Madison that day? Are we looking for a possible serial killer? Well, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, no official connection between the 2 cases has ever been established. Yes, law enforcement agencies assigned to both cases can agree that there's possibly a connection here. But without being able to establish a motive in either one of these investigations, it's impossible to be sure. As of today, both the Florence Salon murders and the Dolly Madison bakery murders remain unsolved. But it's got to make you wonder, is there a chance that the same person is responsible? Again, if you want to listen to more about the Florence Salon murders, subscribe to my other podcast, Find My Killer, on Spotify or wherever you're listening right now. I've talked so much about Great Bend and the kind of community that it was. A nice place to live and have a family, not a place known for its unsolved double homicides. But that doesn't mean crime wasn't happening. It was. At the time, Great Bend was having issues with drugs, specifically meth. To be blunt, they had a drug problem. A lot of people were using, they were addicted, so that meant drug sales were happening. So one idea was that these murders could be related to drugs. Another idea is that Mandi, the bakery clerk, was the intended target. But if that's the case, how did they know she was going to be there? She had only gotten the job there 3 days before, and she wasn't even supposed to be there. She was covering the shift. Plus, she wasn't a drug dealer and had no connection to drugs. The same thing could be said about Mary Drake. She was just a customer and had nothing to do with drugs. There's no way someone would have known that she was going to be there. So it doesn't seem like either one of them were the target. This leads to another theory. The victims weren't the targets, the bakery was. 2002 ends, then comes 2003, 2004. Nothing in the case happened until years later in 2007. The police released an image of a guy seen in a nearby smoke shop about 3 hours before the murders. This was the biggest update in the case in years. And for reference, this smoke shop is next door to the Dolly Madison bakery. So, what does a smoke shop have to do with a bakery? Well, if you put this image up next to the composite sketch of the man seen locking up the bakery that day, they're almost identical. But this information, this photo, came out in 2007. So what took the police so long to release this image? Well, over the years, the public has become very critical of how the police in Great Bend, as well as the KBI, have handled this case. They said things like, the investigation was sloppy. The Great Bend Police Department should have waited for the state police, the KBI, to show up on the scene before doing anything. They said the police missed critical forensic evidence. Well, this became just another one of the public's criticism of the case. The police had an image of a person seen at the smoke shop right next door to the bakery. They were there in the smoke shop just about 3 hours before they suspect the murders took place. And to top it off, this same person closely resembles the man seen locking up the bakery that day. Why was this information only coming out years later in 2007? Well, the police apparently didn't review the smoke shop's security cameras until 2007. Up until then, that piece of evidence was just sitting in a box at the police station. It wasn't until 2007 when a detective finally sat down, went through the tapes, and that's when they spotted this person. So the image is finally released, and not long after that, a guy called into the police saying that it was him. He was the guy they were searching for, and the guy seen at the smoke shop just hours before the murders. His name is Tim Moore, and this is his story. He said his son called him saying that his picture was all over the news. And when he turned on the TV for himself, there it was. His photograph taken from inside of the smoke shop, and underneath of it read something like, "Wanted, a man who might have information about the Dolly Madison murders." So Tim Moore says he picked up the phone and immediately called the police. He didn't have anything to do with this, and he wanted to clear his name. He claims to be a frequent customer of that particular smoke shop. That afternoon, he went there to buy a pack of cigarettes while waiting for his girlfriend to get off work at Walmart across town. But he denied knowing anything about the murders until his son called him saying that his photo was all over the news. So Tim Moore agreed to go down to the nearest police station to take a polygraph examination. The result? He passed with flying colors, and the police told him that he was cleared. He likely didn't have anything to do with it. He was just some guy who looked like the sketch. He was in the area about 3 hours before the killings at the bakery next door, and that was it. I mentioned a few minutes ago that the victims probably weren't the targets. It could have been the bakery itself. Let's talk about that theory. According to the documentary, The Dolly Madison Murders, there was a guy by the name of Dilton Myers who worked at the bakery at some point. He might have even been a manager. And according to witnesses, Dilton Myers would teach some of his friends how to rob the bakery. He said, all you have to do is this. Go in around shift change because that's when they would count down the register. The employees would take some of the cash, put it into an envelope, and leave it under the register. After that, you walk around the store until you find something that's out of stock. You go back up to the front clerk and ask if they have any more of it in the back room. And while they're gone, you grab the money bag and get out of there. It was really simple. But Dilton Myers' friends probably weren't the only ones who were stealing or taking money from the Dolly Madison. According to police reports, throughout the 1990s, that bakery had become a criminal hotspot. There were robberies, property was stolen, damage claims. There were a lot of separate police incidents. So you would think after all of these robberies and police calls, the business would have some type of security system installed. Unfortunately, they never did. No security system, cameras, alarms, anything were ever installed. But if people knew that they could easily rob that place, maybe it was an easy target. Someone could have walked into the Dolly Madison that day intending to only rob it or steal from the business, but somewhere along the way, things turned violent. Maybe Mandi wouldn't give up the money in the register. She was a brand new employee. She probably didn't want to lose her job, so she put up a fight. But whoever did this didn't like that. So what may have started as a simple robbery turned deadly. Then when it comes to Mary Drake, she was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. She was just there shopping for bread when all of this happened, and she couldn't be left as a witness. Then after they were killed, the person responsible took cash out of the registers, leaving the victims' wallets behind. Maybe they just didn't see them, or they just wanted to get out as quickly as possible. But before they left, they cleaned up a little bit. Took Mandi's keys to the front door, locked up, telling that customer that the bakery was closed early that day. So maybe this was all of a robbery gone really, really wrong. Now, if that's the story, if that's what happened, how does this case get solved? Well, insert the forensic evidence. Fast forward to September of 2022, 20 years later. The KBI announced that they had new evidence in the case. They said they had a male DNA profile that was obtained from one of the victims' bodies. They wouldn't say which victim it came from, Mandi or Mary, or where exactly the DNA was found. Was it found on their clothes? Was it underneath their fingernails? I don't know. They simply said they had what they believe is the killer's DNA. But here's the bad news. According to the KBI, there isn't much of it. They haven't been able to identify who it belongs to, and it wasn't enough to enter into a national database. So the only thing they can do with it is a direct DNA comparison. But in order to do that, they have to have someone to compare it to. Here's a direct quote from one of the special agents with the KBI. This quote comes from that 2022 press conference. Over the past year, KBI special agents and forensic scientists completed an exhaustive review of all the forensic evidence collected in this investigation. They reassessed the potential for additional results by utilizing current forensic technologies. especially those that had significant advancements in the 20 years since Drake and Alexander were killed, end quote. He then talked about how small the DNA profile is and how a direct comparison is the only thing they can do. Quote, so while useful, it doesn't help answer the question as to who that person is today, but it's promising, and we hope that it will help us in the future, end quote. It's hard to know exactly what all of this means since the police have always been very secretive when it comes to this case. We don't even know why the DNA sample can't be run through any type of database. We assume it's because the sample is too small, but how exactly is too small? Just thinking about the cases we've covered on this show in the past, even the smallest of DNA samples are usually able to be uploaded to databases. In one episode that we did, the amount of DNA the police had to work with was described as being only the size of a gnat's eyebrow. That's how small the DNA sample can be and still be put through databases. And that's the key here. If we don't have a direct sample to compare it to, we need to find family members of the killer. And that's exactly how genetic genealogy works. Take unknown DNA collected at a crime scene, upload it to different DNA databases, and look for relatives. We've probably covered over 100 types of these cases on this podcast alone. So it's unclear exactly how small this DNA sample is and why the KBI believes that they aren't able to upload it to any type of national database. But without the answers to any of those questions, it's impossible for me to say. But I think it's pretty clear that DNA sample is the key to solving this entire case. Find out who that DNA belongs to, and we're probably going to know who our killer is. So, how does this case get solved? Well, is there a private lab the KBI can work with to look at that DNA sample again? Maybe there's nothing they can do at the state or county level, but maybe one of these private labs specializing in this type of advanced DNA testing, genetic genealogy, maybe there's something that they can do. I hope that there is. Parabon Nanolabs, maybe in Virginia, Othram in Texas. These are just a couple of labs that we've talked about in previous episodes on the show before, but these are also labs that are used to working with even the smallest amounts of DNA. So again, maybe there's nothing they can do at the local level, at the state level, but maybe one of these private labs, maybe they can do something. There might also be a funding issue. This type of advanced DNA testing isn't cheap. It usually costs $10,000, sometimes even more, to do this type of testing. So maybe it's money that's an issue with the police in this case. Most of these private labs that I've been talking about, they all rely on private funding. They aren't public, government-funded agencies like the police is. So they rely on donors and financial supporters. So my hope is that someday a private lab will work with the KBI, get the proper financial funding, and see if they can still do any type of genealogy testing on that small DNA sample. Because otherwise, it looks like the KBI is waiting to have someone to do a direct comparison with. And if that's the case, we might be waiting a long, long time for that to finally happen. And that's assuming our suspect is still alive at this point. Over 20 years ago, Mandi Alexander and Mary Drake were murdered inside of that Dolly Madison bakery. And as of today, their killer remains at large. Was this some type of targeted attack? Was the killer after either one of the victims? But after what? And how do they know they were going to be at the bakery that day? Was this completely random? Was robbery actually the motive and 2 innocent women lost their lives that day? But how can you explain the wallets and purses being left behind? If you're going to rob a place, then rob it and finish the job. What does the man seen locking up the bakery know about the crime? Where is this killer from? Are they local to Great Bend, Or was this someone simply passing through, a transient maybe? And the most important question, will we ever know who that unknown male DNA found to the crime scene belongs to? Can the KBI work with a private lab to retest it? Or will something else be done as new forensic testing becomes available? Who is responsible for the Dolly Madison bakery murders? Anyone with information regarding this case is asked to contact the KBI directly at 1-800-KS-CRIME or online at kbi.ks.gov/SAR. There is currently a $17,000 reward for anyone with information leading to an arrest. To share your thoughts on this week's episode, follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode sharing my personal thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review. You can also support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, please visit patreon.com/forensictales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Jerry M., Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Marianne C., Lois B., Lynn H., Ashley S., Alice B., Danielle D., and Savannah. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.